Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's webcast. Our topic for today, Oracle Database 19c, Developer Focus on the Converged Database. So this session is part of an ongoing webcast series. We call it the Oracle Converged Database Virtual Event Series. My name is John Mashrecki, and I'm pleased to be one of a trio of presenters for you today. I'm joined in our virtual studio by my colleagues Eugenio Galliano and Jeff Smith. Eugenio is, I'll call him my doppelganger on our business development strategy and innovation team. And Jeff is a distinguished product manager, and he covers our Oracle developer tools. So welcome, guys.
Hey, John.
Hey, thank you, John.
Glad to have you guys here. So this should be a great topic. I'm actually really looking forward to it and we've got a lot of content to cover. So I'm going to get into it fairly quickly. We've got you guys for the next 45 minutes or so, and we're going to look at how the Oracle Converged Database plays a major role in supporting developers and making your lives easier. We're going to discuss what developers are looking for. We're going to talk about the different languages that are supported, the great tools that are in the database that come with the database, and a lot more. Deb covered the logistics, so this is being recorded, and you guys please use the Q&A function. We have a lot of content, so I'm not sure how much time we're going to have at the tail end. So ask your questions in real time during the session in the Q&A function. We're all going to be responding when we're not actually speaking. So one more bit of housekeeping to take care of here. I mentioned at the beginning that today's webcast is actually part of an ongoing series, the Converged Database Virtual Event Series. If you like what you see and what you hear, I encourage you guys to check out our landing page where you can register for upcoming live sessions. And these are, we have a cadence going on for every, I think it's 3 or 4 weeks, and access to our library of past on-demand sessions as well. So with that, let's get going. Our agenda for today is all about the developer. What are developers looking for, and what does Oracle have to offer in our database to meet these needs? So just to set expectations, this is an overview session. We're not going to do a deep dive into any one particular technology or another. There are numerous resources available to you guys that go much deeper, starting with the application development landing page on oracle.com. So it's oracle.com/application-development. You guys have the link right on the screen there. And at the tail end of this presentation, we're also going to point you to some additional resources. Hopefully you'll find those very useful. So let's get into this. What is it that developers actually require? So I'm guessing you guys already have a pretty good idea, but let's just summarize this at a high level. First and foremost, developers have their favorite languages and their favorite tools, and they want to know that they have the flexibility to use these tools and any other tool for that matter, something, even if things come along in the future. So this includes popular programming languages like JavaScript and Python and C and various others, but also open interfaces, right? So REST services for developing web services and other APIs. Some developers and analysts, right, we'll call them citizen developers, they want rapid, low-code environments, development environments, so that they can quickly develop applications without having to write a lot of code or even any code. And again, minimal learning curve, right? So they want to be able to deploy their apps using modern techniques, including things like Docker containers and microservices, etc., right? So that's the first and foremost requirement that developers are looking for. Secondly, a lot of development is, and modern development is really rich in analytics. So machine learning, spatial, graph. Developers want full support for these and other, specialized analytics and the languages that support these analytics, whether that's SQL or R or Python or various others. So applications today go far beyond relational data structures, right? So developers want to be able to use other data types. JSON, very popular, right? XML, spatial, graph, not to mention external data stores, HDFS, Kafka, et cetera, like object stores, right? Developers want to be able to deploy anywhere, right? You don't want to have to write or change your application multiple times to support different platforms, right? So infrastructure and portability, right? Cloud, on-prem, mobile devices, all of that needs to be supported. And lastly, and certainly not least, developers are looking to have scalability, performance, security, high availability, all of the capabilities that support an enterprise capable application, right? And all of this should come relatively easily without having to do a lot of extra coding and additional work. So these are really the areas that we look at when we look at what developers are needing. So let's take a look with how Oracle and the Oracle database, our Converged Database, supports these and many others, beginning with languages. So RedMonk is a developer-focused industry analyst firm. And every year or two, they update an analysis that they've been doing for a number of years around the most popular programming languages. They do this by extracting programming language data from two or more of the most popular developer sites. They look at Stack Overflow, where they're examining the levels of discussion on particular languages, the help requests. As of the last year, Stack Overflow had over 10 million registered users. Github is the other one. This hosts code for software development and version control, and it's pretty well the largest host of source code in the world. They've got 40 million users. So RedMonk analyzes all of the data from these two and other sites, and they combine them to create a ranking to look at the most popular languages and which ones are getting traction over time. So I guess it wouldn't be surprising when you look at the top 10, JavaScript, Python, Java, PHP, C++, and a whole bunch of others, right? So JavaScript, extremely popular for web development, for creating dynamic web content. And you also have, and hand in hand with that is Node.js. You've got Python, very popular for the AI and machine learning world. Java, extremely popular for portability, right? There's a big emphasis on portability. You get the idea. So these are very popular languages. So then the big question, which ones of these do Oracle support? Well, as you might have guessed, we actually support all of them. Oracle supports in our database all modern programming languages. Node.js, Python, PHP, R, Ruby, and a whole bunch of others, right? As well as the traditional languages, C, C++, Java, and even SQL, right? It only makes sense. And because not only do we, Oracle, make the effort to be wide open and leverage all of these different languages and create the drivers and support, but because Oracle database is such a prevalent data source, it's the world's most popular database. We also get very rich support from open source and other third-party contributors, right? So full language support, all the drivers. What else? Well, I mentioned SQL, right? Oracle obviously has a very rich SQL and procedural language SQL, PL SQL support. Now, that's important because you may be developing in all of these other languages, but at the back end, when we do the analytics and we start spanning all those different data types, SQL is the language of choice for querying and for doing those analytics. So it's a very rich capability, and we have a number of different industry standard tools, industry standard language support, and a number of rich tools to support this. We also have APIs. The SODA API is basically a NoSQL style API for Node.js, C, and others. Tied to JSON. And then we've got the Oracle REST Data Services, or ORDS. And this basically provides an interface through HTTPS for both developing and managing the environment. So to tell us a little bit more about this, Jeff, I'm going to ask you to kind of dig in a little bit here, please.
Thanks, John. Well, we decided a long time ago we needed yet another acronym here at Oracle. So I usually call it ORDS, but Oracle REST Data Services is included with your Oracle database license, and it allows you to publish RESTful web services for your database, and that's for anything inside your database, whether that's a relational table, a JSON document or collection. And it handles anything that the languages of the database handles. So that could be user-defined types, it could be XML, it could be JSON stored in a relational table, it could be spatial information. And as sort of a web gateway for the database, we take your requests over that most ubiquitous of interfaces, HTTP. We speak the web language with you, but on the back end, we're doing all the database work for you and bringing back to you, in most cases, a JSON response with all the proper rules of the road of HTTP being followed. So everything's secured, you get the proper status codes. And if you build really useful and well-documented REST APIs, then your developers and your customers are going to be able to accomplish amazing things with that. So it's not just for the data and for the objects in your database, but it's also for the database itself. So if you want to create a environment where continuous integration and delivery and these things are automated and all of your workflows and pipelines are set up and good to go, you can actually make REST calls to the database and do things like create a new pluggable database or issue a data pump export or create a user. You can hit the next slide, I think. So I talked ahead of myself a little bit. ORDS is included with the database. You can install it anywhere you would have your mid-tier, and it's going to work either as a standalone solution with its own Eclipse Jetty web server built in, or you can easily plug it into your existing WebLogic or Tomcat infrastructures. If you want to learn more, okay, I should say this too. We also support not just the Oracle database, but many Oracle databases. So you can have a single instance of ORDS covering a fleet of Oracle databases, or even a single ORDS talking to a single Oracle multi-tenant database and having services deployed there for one or more of your pluggable databases in that. So if you're a vendor providing your own cloud services for your customers, you could have REST APIs segregated, separated in each PDB for each customer if you want. So my penance for sinning by creating a new acronym was to give you the easiest possible to remember URL. So if you want to learn more about REST data services, how to build these RESTful services, and how to use our tools to accomplish this, you simply just go to oracle.com/rest. I'm also going to talk a little bit about JSON in the database. And if you want to say JSON, I will not laugh. I go both ways on that. I usually do a poll and see which way people prefer to pronounce it, and then I go the opposite way just to be contrary, but we don't have time for polls today. JSON support in the database was added several years ago, and we've added onto it release after release in 19C. When it says comprehensive, it really is comprehensive. So you can do things like store JSON documents and it's part of a relational table, or you can say, I don't want to think in terms of tables and rows. I want to think in terms of collections and documents, and you can use the SOTA for REST APIs and insert documents and query documents and update documents if you want, as well as you can use SQL to pull things in and out of those JSON documents. We give you things like the JSON data guide, which can look at the metadata of a document and tell you, oh, these attributes are common across all of these documents. And you can use those as sort of a template to create new ones. And you can use the output of that to build what we call these query by example descriptions. So instead of saying, select star from where, I can say, I want a document that matches these parameters. So you literally do provide a query by example. You provide an example of the JSON structure you're looking to match on or not match on. And if we look further ahead than 19C in our innovative release in 20C, we have JSON available as a native data type. So it's comprehensive today, but it's only going to get better as we go forward. And you can use SQL, you can use PL/SQL, or you can use the JSON specific, what we call the SOTA APIs to deal with these. Now, I did talk about ORDs. You can use the same ORDs to make APIs for dealing with your relational tables. You can use REST APIs hosted out of ORDs to deal directly with your JSON collections and documents.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. So let's take a look now at some of the tools that you get with the Oracle database. Now, I'm going to emphasize a couple of things here. First of all, Oracle has some amazing developer tools, things like Apex and SQL Developer and others. But here's a big thing that we need to highlight. The tools go with the database. And I don't mean just from a free perspective, but I mean if anywhere that you can run the Oracle database, the tools go with it. So whatever you develop using those tools is completely portable. Okay, so let's take a quick look here. Let's begin with Application Express, or Apex. This is an incredible low-code development platform. It is highly, highly adopted by hundreds of thousands of developers. It's a really, really popular technology. And it's extremely easy to use to build rich web-based applications. And the really nice thing about Apex is that whatever you develop, it's built into the database. So it leverages all of the security and the high availability and all of the infrastructure that you've got in the database. And you don't have to do anything further to do that. So take a look if you haven't already seen it. It's a very rich application environment. In fact, I think you can try it out for free on apex.oracle.com. So let's see, widely adopted, easy to learn. Let's take a look at an analyst report that just came out. And I like this report because he had a lot of very interesting statements that really highlight this. So this is the Coppinger-Cole report specifically on Oracle Application Express, a secure low-code application development platform. And here's a few clips of a few quotes from that report. Apex is arguably the most popular low-code application platform in the world. And it kind of makes sense because Oracle is a highly prevalent database, and Apex is built in the database, right? Since Oracle databases run everywhere, Apex is much more flexible in terms of available deployment options than many other low-code solutions. So think about it. Again, this is my point earlier of Apex goes with the database, right? So anywhere you can deploy the Oracle database, you can run your environment without any kind of changes. Because Apex stores data in Oracle database, this has massive implications for security and compliance. Sensitive data never needs to leave the database. How cool is that, right? It's secure out of the box. You don't have to do anything other than build your application, and the security comes with it. Since the whole Apex platform, application resources, logic, and data already resides in a database instance, there's nothing to deploy at all. Users only need to share a URL to access the app. So I encourage you guys to read the report. The link is at the bottom there. It's available to everybody. And if you want to see specific examples of Apex built apps, then I encourage you to go to builtwithapex.com. And it's basically a collection of customers, users, applications, all built with Application Express. And you can peruse and take a quick look. All right.
Or if you come work for Oracle, some of the most heavily used apps inside are based on Apex.
That's a great point, right? All of our
and they deploy new ones like every day. Like it's very impressive how quickly they can. And a lot of times you don't realize it's Apex because it looks custom built for the solution at hand and not just some templated thing.
Yeah, no, it's a very powerful tool. And again, very low code. A lot of the time there's no code, for if you're building a relatively straightforward application. In fact, if you want to start without anything, you can literally take a spreadsheet and use that as your starting point to load in, and it will pick up the structure from the spreadsheet and get you up and running in minutes. All right, Jeff, I'm going to hand it back to you for the next couple of slides.
Thanks. So sort of a sister product to Apex, we have SQL Developer, again, included with your database license. And it's easier just to call it free. The only reason I would make the distinguish between free and included is it's part of your license. And so when you're paying us for maintenance and for new features in the database and for my Oracle support, that covers things like Application Express and SQL Developer as well. So it's called SQL Developer, but it's not just for those that develop SQL. It also has a rich database administration interface. And it's also ideal for really just anyone that needs to deal with the data inside the database. So whether that's all of those different data types I was referring to before, there's rich support for all of those. There's a built-in RESTful web service development interface built into SQL Developer, so you can work on your REST APIs alongside your PL SQL ones. If you're starting a new project from scratch, we have a complete data modeling interface, so you can start off with your entities and attributes and your ERDs like you learned back in the old day, and turn those into real tables and real rows. And we really like to help people move on to the Oracle platform. So if you have a old Sybase instance, you can literally connect to it and use our wizard and click and move that into an Oracle database. And this screenshot says used by over 5 million Oracle professionals. It's probably closer to 7 million, but 5 is what I hold myself to. I don't like to brag too much. Actually, I like to brag a lot. We have a lot of people using the tool.
Yeah. Jeff, the migration platform, I used to use it way back, and I remember pulling in I think it was a DB2 database, and basically it did all the data conversion, the data type conversions. It did a fair bit of it's not 100%, but it did a fair bit of the code. Yeah. It's pretty powerful stuff.
We can't make migrations easy, but we can definitely make them easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Next one.
So GUIs are great. But sometimes people get mad when they have to pick up a mouse. Your fingers can literally think faster than your brain sometimes. I know my mouth can. It's gotten me into trouble a few times. Well, we built a modern command line interface for the Oracle database. So really, it's everything that people loved about SQL+, married with everything that people loved about SQL Developer. So I can't think of an easier tool to get started with. It's a simple zip file. You unzip it to your machine. It's got the drivers built in. There's no Oracle Home to install or TNS names file to manage. You can immediately connect to the database. It's got things like statement completion, code insight, formatting. We can automatically bring your result sets back, not just as normal SQL+ style output, but in this screenshot, you can see it's actually bringing the rows in a query result as a formatted JSON document. It has a built-in interface to that SOTA API for your JSON document store. And we've recently added support for automated schema management and versioning. So in those continuous deployment pipelines, as developers are making changes and checking in their stuff to GitHub or whatever repo you're using, you can submit change logs to SQL and we figure out what work has to be done in the database to get your application schema from version 1 to version 2. And again, it supports all of the SQL and PL SQL and all of the data types you're gonna deal with. So it's ideal for that converged environment.
Great. So next up, data miner for machine learning. So in the Oracle database, we have had machine learning capabilities for quite some time, and we continue to enhance those capabilities with automation and adding more and more algorithms. And there is a GUI interface that taps into all of those great capabilities. It's called Data Miner, and it basically helps up-level the data scientist capabilities, those rich analytics that are built into the Oracle database, that are included with the Oracle database, and it can up-level the capabilities for what we'll call the citizen data scientists, the analysts who may not have that data science PhD. So it is a rich interface, drag and drop. You can see it's very graphical, lets you manage the workflows and the entire process of developing your machine learning processes. I won't get into the many algorithms that are incorporated within the database. We've done a whole other session, so I'm going to give a cheap plug here for one of our prior sessions on machine learning in the Oracle Converged Database. So take a look for that. I think we pointed you at the beginning to the link, the website. All right. Next up is graph and graph visualization. Eugenio, can you speak to this, please?
Sure. Thank you, John. So as hopefully you're aware, the Oracle database has full support for graph data type analytics built into the engine. So you can actually store information that refers to graph applications, and then we have an in-memory engine that allows you to analyze these graphs. And what you're seeing here, as a matter of fact, is on the right is a tool that's included with our graph engine, which is called graph visualization, which lets you visualize the results of information stored in graph format and graph analytics. And so why do we have this, and what's the use case? So if any of you, for example, uses LinkedIn, right, you can always see, oh, you're associated with this person, and by a third degree or fourth degree, you're associated with these other folks, and they're associated by 10,000 more folks at level 4 and 5. That's a very easy way to understand how you can view data in graph format, right? So how many steps away are you from a particular situation or some particular item? So we have a lot of graph functions built into this engine to do graph analytics. There's quite a few use cases. A lot of them have to do with, for example, analyzing flow of money, for example, for money laundering situations. That's a very common use. Predicting where, specific events may move to based on previous moving patterns and so on. So it's included in the database. It is free. And we do have a lot of customers in the financial industry and other industries that are using it. So as a matter of fact, let me give you an example of one of the customers that's using it. So John, if you can go on to the next slide. So Paysafe is a company that's similar, I'm going to say, to PayPal, and it operates in the UK. So they are primarily an online payment system and money, movement system in the UK. And of course, as such, being in the online world, they have a lot of fraud or attempted fraud in the money that gets moved around. And so they were trying very hard to understand what the patterns were for fraud and how, money may have moved from one person to the other. And when you're doing this in a traditional Excel spreadsheet, or let alone an Oracle database or anything else, these are very, very long, expensive, and CPU consuming operations if you run a SQL query to go and try to understand that. And even when you get the result of that SQL query, it's still hard to visualize exactly what is going on. So they decided to implement a graph, to do this kind of analysis in graph format. And what you see on the left is a representation of one of the fraud patterns that they're seeing. So the one on the left is for online gambling. They are a payment system for online gambling. Online gambling, a lot of the entities that provide online gambling, to prevent money laundering, they limit the maximum amount of money that you can bet on particular entities or betting that you can do in general. So, of course, people that are trying to do money laundering, instead of just hitting the limit of, say, $20, $100, whatever it is, they create hundreds or thousands of fake accounts. They move money to those fake accounts, and then they proceed to do betting or whatever else they're trying to do with each of those fake accounts. So with one account, you can bet $20. With 1,000 accounts, you can bet 20 times 1,000. And so what you're seeing here is determining the pattern of movement from a particular account, the one on the left, to the middle circle, which is owned by the same basic entity as the one on the left. And you can see how money is being transferred from one to many accounts, and then those many accounts actually proceed to put the bets as a very large entity. So without actually looking at a graph, it would be very hard to see how this money is moving and what the relationship is between these different accounts. The one on the right shows a similar situation where there's hundreds of accounts that money laundering operators create to move money, and you can see how that money is being moved to one or two entities, which the one in the middle and the ones in the concentric circle. So it's very easy to see in this graphical format how the money is being moved between accounts. And so, we actually support a language called GraphQL, which makes it much easier to do these kind of relationships and analytics, and then looking at the data in graph format. So again, this is included in the database. There are very specific use cases that are popular, and if you already own the database, please give it a shot.
Excellent.
John?
Thanks, Eugenio. The visualizations are incredible. I mean, as you're describing this, it really just is completely eye-opening. Okay, so next up, Spatial Studio. So you guys all know that Oracle has a very powerful spatial engine in the database, and you get it free with the Oracle database, right? By the way, if we haven't already mentioned, you get very rich analytics in the Oracle database. We've covered so far machine learning, and we've covered graph, and we're talking about spatial, and there's a lot more embedded in the database itself. So you don't have to move your data outside somewhere else, right? That's one of the big benefits that you get with the Oracle Converged Database. So spatial. This interface is a web-based, very easy to use, rich interface. It lets you tap into the very extensive capabilities. And again, I'm not going to go into all of the different algorithms and capabilities of Spatial in the engine, but Oracle Spatial is used by practically every major government agency out there. I mean, it is prevalent and it is very powerful. And we have a very rich interface to that spatial engine, and lets you do all the analysis, lets you create your mapping. And it's not just mapping. You can, we've got applications where building maintenance is being managed through Spatial. So let me give you an example. We have a customer called Newstar, and they've been using Spatial as well as Graph and other analytics within the Oracle database for quite some time. And they've built this capability on top of their existing SaaS application. So they've got a very rich analytical GIS application. They've got hundreds of customers, and each of those customers have hundreds and hundreds of users. These guys are a provider of all of this, and they have built and exposed all of the rich geographic capabilities with Oracle Spatial. They do retail site analysis. You can see they do market potential sizing, all kinds of marketing capabilities built into this app. The big deal for them is they were able to scale this up because it's built into the Oracle database. They dramatically improved performance with this application, in some cases up to 300x. So I encourage you guys, again, the links are here to read the story as an example, just one of many examples of customers and how they use our built-in analytics in the Oracle database.
We had some exciting news just yesterday on Spatial. The Oracle database was named the winner of the Geospatial Technology Company of the Year by a Geospatial consortium. So that was kind of cool.
That's great. I hadn't seen that. And it's not surprising. We've been doing Spatial for a very, very long time. And I will tell you that the advanced spatial engine that that is in the database, that used to be a paid option. And was it a year or two ago, we basically said, you know what, if our customers are going to deploy the Oracle database as a converged strategy, then we're going to include these analytics in the core of the database. So this is something that you guys get.
Pay for the engine, don't pay for the data format.
Exactly. All right, so let's briefly talk about architectures. We're kind of coming to the tail end of this presentation. I just want to make sure that you guys are all clear about how Oracle in the database, how we support. We mentioned the Docker containers at the beginning. We mentioned microservices. So let me begin with a very high-level picture of our multi-tenant architecture. And trust me, I will tie this together in a second. So let's start with our multi-tenant architecture. This is a quick recap. And again, there's plenty of other presentations that go into this in a lot more depth. So you guys know that we've got our container architecture with the pluggable databases. This is a great way of isolating and containerizing these different databases, but managing them as a single unit, right? So you can patch as a single unit, you can back them up as a single unit, but as far as the applications are concerned, they're looking at individual databases, right? So here we've got the pluggable databases. They are self-contained, rapid provisioning, all of that is included. Then we have the container where we can do our common operations, and we are able to do a lot deeper, denser consolidation because we're managing the resources and sharing them across these different pluggable databases at the container level. So much better for operations and for consolidation. But how does this help you guys architect your applications? So let me bring it all back together. And the way that we do this is we can deploy, well, first of all, we have full support for Docker containers in your applications, Kubernetes, and et cetera. So the whole microservices architecture up here doesn't change for you guys. What you are seeing under the covers with the database is that each of the pluggable databases can support its microservice, right? A particular microservice. So this is how you can deploy these isolated workloads, these isolated microservices, and not have to have a separate database for every single one of them. The pluggable databases are all in a common application container, right? A container which holds all of your data for the application tier. So very high level. I just want to make sure you guys are clear. There's entire presentations around this topic, but I just wanted to touch on this to make sure that we fully support all the modern data architectures for deploying your applications. All right, so let's just wrap things up here. The Oracle Converged Database supports everything that developers want. We've got all of the language support, we've got the REST APIs, we've got rich tools like Application Express for low-code development, SQL Developer, all the spatial interface, the graph interface, all of those capabilities come with the database. The analytics, right? Aside from obviously Oracle supports SQL and PL SQL, but we also support R and Python and all of those languages for the deep analytics. We have embedded capabilities around machine learning, spatial, graph. We talked a lot about those. And don't forget, there's an Oracle database in-memory engine that is built into the Oracle database. The first 16 gig of that in-memory data structure, that's included with your license. If you go beyond that, it's an option. But again, very powerful capabilities for speeding up your reporting and your analytics. Data support. We support in a single database relational data, JSON data, XML, spatial, graph, text, all kinds of other data files. And we can also reach out transparently to all of those object stores and other big data environments. Infrastructure, aka portability. You can build your application using all of these, whatever your favorite tools, the Oracle database. It is completely portable. You can basically deploy it on-prem, on Exadata, on traditional hardware, in the Oracle Cloud, in third-party clouds, right? Completely portable. And the last thing I'm going to point out here, and for those who know the Oracle database, who know that Oracle is the gold standard for enterprise class capabilities, right? What I mean by that is security, high availability, scalability, performance. This is what we made our name on for a long, long time. Well, all of those services are available to you guys as developers, basically with the database, right? You don't have to do anything extra. It's there. If the database is there and it's already supporting the security and availability, et cetera. So you don't have to worry about that as a developer. You certainly don't want to be putting that into your application code when it can be centrally architected in the database. All right, on that note, we're going to have a little top 5 reasons why developers will love the Oracle database. Number 5, I'm hoping you guys are guessing ahead of me already. Number 5, the Oracle database supports modern data management architectures such as Docker containerization and microservices. We just talked about that, right? Number 4, the Oracle Converged Database includes free, powerful embedded analytics, machine learning, spatial, graph, advanced SQL capabilities as well, right? There's a lot of analytics built into the database. Number 3, We natively support multiple data types, including relational, JSON, text, etc. Number 2, again, included with the database, we have some very rich developer tools. You saw Application Express, very, very highly adopted. SQL Developer, again, very, very highly adopted. And many, many other tools out of the box. And last but not least, of course, we support all popular development languages, both today and in the future, right? Because Oracle is a very prevalent data source. We have extensive open source and other support. All right, those are your top 5 reasons to love the Oracle database for developing. I want to point you guys to a couple of really good additional resources. First of all, there's a very recent white paper. It just came out, and it's called How to Make Developers and Data More Productive, the Oracle's Converged Database. The link is right here, or you can just Google it. You'll find it on the oracle.com site. This white paper basically goes into a lot more depth into everything we talked about today at a very high level, right? And there's lots of great content in there, and it'll point you elsewhere as well as needed. Secondly, if you don't already know, Oracle has the database XE version, and this is basically intended for developers. It's free. It has the vast majority of the Oracle enterprise capabilities built into it, with a couple of exceptions like Rack, DataGuard, and Golden Gate. It is forum supported, and it has some limitations on your deployment size. But otherwise, it's a great technology for developers. We also have something called Live SQL. You can basically find that as well. And these, there's some great capabilities and tools for the Oracle developer. All right, on that note, we are going to take a minute. Actually, I'm going to pause for a second.